Now, did she actually really earn that? A few months back I did a breakdown on The Evil Within, discussing how it was a love letter to the horror genre as a whole and how the sequel proved to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. But most importantly, I discussed how it earned its place in the iconic survival horror hall of fame. It was because of that awesome chainsaw scene. I'm pretty proud of the video overall, so it's linked down below if you want to see it, but I discussed how that chainsaw scene and one-liner was earned because of what Sebastian had to go through from the 2 past previous games. And that brings me on to Resident Evil Remake, and it was an incredible experience that I replayed over and over again to master it countless times. The fast-paced encounters and action set pieces do the original justice beyond any belief, while adding a new flair to it which lines up with Resident Evil 2 Remake, but at the same time lining up with the later entries in the series. My biggest request with Resident Evil 3 Remake had to be that Jill gets her big comeback into the spotlight of the series. That we'll see her more battle hardened and a force to be messed with, but also to have a foe that she cannot defeat, and that's when Nemesis comes in. Jill had a legacy that had to be lived up to, but Nemesis had a bigger legacy which had to be fulfilled. Just his name and his gameplay changing AI back in 1999 left a lot of people feeling dread. He was one of the first types of enemy, especially in the Resident Evil series, that was able to transition through doors and surprise players at any point, making sure players were always aware and always on high alert. Throughout the years, we've seen Chris Walkers, amnesia grunts, xenomorphs and even zombies follow the legacy that Nemesis provided. But even after all these years, many people bring up Nemesis when talking about his encounters. It's like he was the worst enemy out of all these combined. But it's because of the way people thought about Nemesis and how people look up to Jill Valentine's as a main protagonist. Of course, Capcom had 2 major legacies that they had to build on and even top from the originals. But these 2 characters were also powerhouses in the gaming industry. And that's where my main issue with Resident Evil Remake comes in. Let me explain. As she's the main character and we see her at least 89% of the time, we're gonna have to of course talk about Jill Valentine. Jill in this game is Rambo, PTSD included. Outside of the intro, which we will get to, she doesn't actually feel any sense of fear or dread, even though most of the time you can see that she is visibly damaged or at least hurt in some sort of regards. Throughout this whole entire story, she keeps a pretty clear head and a good sense of control of the city. No matter what happens, she seems to be pretty level-headed with her situations and comes up with a way to get out of it, which is great because it actually perfectly complements why Leon and Claire had a hard time in Resident Evil 2. Because Jill is an experienced member of STARS and has experience with the undead before, it shows that she is the best of the best, and that reason alone is why Umbrella has to send in the Nemesis, because the STARS unit ain't going to be taking this line down. And if Umbrella have to send in Nemesis, it makes sense for him to be a foe which can take out every single STARS member, right? But for some reason in this game he doesn't really have any sense of presence unless you're forced to look at him in a cutscene or fight him in a boss battle. And let me explain what I mean by a sense of presence. Obviously he is there and he's present in the moment and he makes the player change their gameplay because of course they have to outsmart him and get away from him. But I mean he affects the game in a way that doesn't necessarily make you feel uncomfortable. He sort of just appears and then goes whenever he's told to by the script. At every moment that you're told that you have to fight Nemesis or outrun him, it never really feels like he's getting in the way of everything. Very quickly on, it feels like Jill keeps coming back for more and doesn't really fear Nemesis in the same way that she did in the original.
How is this fucker not dead yet?
Just know they're gone.
Often when he turns up in this game, she lets out a sigh or a groan because she's just bored of him slowing her down, getting on with her objective. And the reason that they have her reacting like this in these kind of ways makes sense because it simulates the feeling that Nemesis gave off in the original. Popping up and getting in the way of the player, making sure that they get slowed down in whatever they may be doing. Making sure that they're always on edge and never know when he's popping up next to often make the player go, ah, here we go again. But also within this game, every time he pops up, it feels like it's just a reason for you to end that next area. You're literally being blown to next stages and even blown to next locations just to get the story pushing forward. So every time he appears, it kind of feels like it's the end of something rather than having to face a new challenge. Of course, how much of a challenge he gives you really does depend on what difficulty you're playing, but of course I'm talking about first time players here where you're not able to go any higher than the hardcore difficulty. But the most terrifying aspect of the original for first time players is that you're forced to make choices in the moment. moment. Even fans of the first 2 games would have gone into this game not expecting these choices to ever be a thing. It was something that was only seen in this game, and it causes you to have to think and make decisions there and then. The payoff could be Nemesis getting damaged and even knocked down, earning you a reward, or you escaping and obviously saving ammo for another fight. But he forced upon you a legit feel of fight or flight reaction, having you panic in the moment and have to intensify his presence by making you make a choice which you're not even sure of the outcome or what it could be. So when people heard this game was being made, of course many people was going to compare Mr. X to the new Nemesis, and people just didn't want to see a rehash of what was done in Resident Evil 2 Remake. And of course in regards to Nemesis, they wanted him to add a new flair and even create a new legacy for people to remember him in this version of the game. But the problem is, in this game I feel like he's actually more forgettable than the fedora wearing Mr. X. The reason why Mr. X still remains in the conversation when people talk about Resident Evil 2 is because he made you make micro decisions at every moment that he was lurking in the halls of the RPD, which actually was akin to the likes of the classic Resident Evil 3 decision making without the text and the white popping up on screen. Do you stay and fight to get past him, or do you take the longer way around but possibly running into more monsters? Whether you think he was annoying or a threat, you knew that you had to act fast to get through him. In 3, the game often just tells you to escape the creature, which tells you that there's an escape and a clear objective around him. And something that I hear a lot of people criticise is how he's ineffective, but they don't really mention why, and I think it's because how these areas are structured. Most of the levels whenever he appears when he's in normal Nemesis mode are all pretty linear. It doesn't mean escape the creature, what it should be saying is sprint to the finish. It actually makes him seem a lot more simple than he really does appear. After he comes out of the wall in the first area, you run to the control room, then to the control room to the train station. From the train station then you run to the rooftop. After the rooftop you're told to run to Carlos through the gas station. After the gas station you're then told to outrun him and get to a fighting area. Every single time he appears it almost seems like a sprint to the finish guarantee, which is a real shame because it takes away a lot of great enemy designs which Resident Evil has done in the past. Jack Baker is a family man, but most of all he has a sense of presence that provides the player and Ethan with dread. Not only was he built up by the end of the demo with his iconic "Welcome to the Family Son" line, but throughout the intro and beginning hours of Resident Evil 7 he'd choose up every single scene he's in with his incredible dialogue and characteristics.
Welcome to the family, son.
You're trying to avoid a man who knows the layout of his own house like the back of his hand. It's very intimidating to be able to hide behind a table as he searches a room for you because you don't have enough ammo to take him out, and even if you did you knew it wouldn't do anything. There was never ever a seemingly end goal, but you knew you had to get around him to get on with the game. And that's why when it comes to the scene when you have to chop him down with a chainsaw, it feels so rewarded when you see him explode. That feeling of all the weight that you was carrying finally gone off your shoulders, knowing that he's finally gone and everything that you knew or feared from the demo all the way to his unforgettable intro, it finally felt earned for Ethan to say his goodbye in a brilliant one-liner.
Do me a favor and stay dead.
And throughout Resident Evil 3 Remake, it feels like there are these moments where Jill could actually be in trouble, where there could actually be no way out for her. That's until she turns Nemesis around and makes him her personal bitch. I mentioned you don't feel fear or presence, that's because she is too busy criticising him like a crazed fan, or even as Jake Muller would put it,
Or like an ex-girlfriend. Guy doesn't know when to quit.
She's always throwing brilliant one-liners and insults at him which make you genuinely laugh, that by the time she actually says one at the end it kind of feels like it wasn't even earned or even a one-liner at all. In the original, Jill didn't actually say much to Nemesis, obviously this is down to limitations of audio of course, but it also shows that she was too scared, putting the player in her boots by having to think about the situations and work out how to get out of them. As the game goes on you actually see her react with a little bit more confidence, as shown in the clock tower sequence. So when it's time to finally defeat Nemesis in the original game and you've witnessed that golden moment, it really feels so amazing and properly earned.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
In Resident Evil Remake, there's this moment where you have to use yourself as bait to distract the Nemesis so people were able to board the train without being killed. And in this moment, of course, you would think Jill would panic knowing that she would have to run into a dead end and make her plan up as she goes along, but instead she just throws a famous one-liner at him and it makes me wonder, why?
Come on, you creepy ass stalker. You want stars? I'll give you stars.
Not why to Jill, because I understand why she did this, she's wicked and filled with style, but I mean, why to Capcom? This could have truly been a tense and memorable moment because you know you're running into a dead end, and you know you don't have much time and you have to outwit a monster which wants to kill you at no stop, but instead you throw a classic one-liner at Nemesis way too early and make us run all the way to a dead end where all we're told to do is press a button prompt. This really could have been a perfect moment to have the layout of the map work in the favour, to have moments where you have to outsmart Nemesis and get around him, very similar to the likes of Mr. X in Resident Evil 2. Have players make the same decision that they would have made in the original game, but of course in more of an organic way without it having to pause the action, and that's exactly what I feel like they missed here. There's a reason why this presence doesn't really last, because it always just ends with you running to a finish and pressing a button or even seeing a cutscene. But if someone's meant to be a super cop and unstoppable like she is, then of course she has to have an enemy to face it. And as I mentioned earlier, there's someone else here with a legacy that really needs to be treated right to make it bigger and badder than it was before. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, there he is. There he is.
Bitch can't swim.
It doesn't feel like Nemesis is out after Jill or to kill the STARS members because he's the ultimate weapon, but it feels like Nemesis is out to kill Jill, but instead of being the ultimate weapon, he's fucking Wile E. Coyote. Every time he thinks he has to drop on her, something seems to get in the way. It felt like that Jill was always being treated a little bit better with her legacy more than Nemesis, even though he's the person that people would talk about in regards to Resident Evil 3. But in my opinion though, I do believe that this intro perfectly sums up Nemesis as a whole, and it really is him at his best. There's a mystery behind who or what he is. Jill is helpless and backed into a corner and really has to think on her toes to get out of his grip. There's no telling him to suck it or anyone calling him a bitch, but there is nothing but pure fear for this merciless killer. And it really does feel like a presence that remains until she gets in the car, and then it all begins.
It's my turn, bitch!
So then when it gets to the end and Jill finally picks up that railgun and has to pull the trigger, it doesn't really feel like you've overcome all the odds, depending on the difficulty you played, but instead it feels like you overcame a very annoying itch, because the feeling of dread or Jill ever being in her final moments never really was present. Even by the end she's screaming at him that she's going to do this only one more time, like she's just gave a kid an arse whipping. So whenever Jill overpowers him or rips off an arm, calls him a bitch, blows him up with confidence that she killed him every single time, does she really actually deserve that one-liner on him in the end? I don't think so personally, because I believe that they threw Jill's confidence and badassery through the roof, and took away everything that Nemesis was all believed and even beloved for. The fact his presence and even the use of his weapons was practically non-existent because of the way that Jill handled it and even overcame him, often made it feel like that he was the one with the legacy that was mistreated. And that kind of makes me feel sad, because this may be the last time we ever see Nemesis in the Resident Evil series. I almost feel like that Nemesis is the one that kind of deserves something a little bit better. Of course, this video is all in my own opinion, and I don't want you to think that I don't like Resident Evil 3 Remake. I actually love this game. I would easily put it possibly on my top 5 Resident Evil games. I've played it a shit ton, and I probably will continue playing for the rest of the year. I've had a blast making this video, but of course I just needed to get this off my chest. If you had any problems with this game, please let me know down below in the comments section, or even if you had a problem with my opinion on how he was handled in this game, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. And of course, I have a lot more videos that I like to upload every single week. I just felt like putting this one out as a little surprise video. And if you did enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, share it, and of course subscribe. And of course, I'll see you at the next checkpoints. Bye bye.